Yeah, I started. Okay, so you can see them. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So let us give maybe another a minute or so for colleagues to join online. So we have some sizable number now. So let us give a minute or two more. Then we will start the session. Okay, I think we can start. So it is 9:02 now.
Sure.
Start. Yeah.
Shall I start? Okay.
Okay, just wait. I will give a brief introduction and then I will tell you to start. So can you close the presentation for now?
Okay, sure.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So wherever you are in the part of the world. So welcome to the International Conference on Children and their families using the multiple indicator cluster survey. I'm Jayachandran, so I'm the regional mix coordinator based in Bangkok. And I will be chairing the session along with my colleague, Turgay Unalan. He is actually part of the global mix team and currently based in Florence. So today's session is early childhood development. And before I introduce our speakers, a few words of housekeeping. So this session will be recorded and hosted on the UNICEF-MICS website and the UNICEF-MICS YouTube channel, as well as Bristol Poverty Institute YouTube channel. And this presentations also will be embedded on the Bristol Poverty Institute website, after the 2 days of, proceedings here. So by attending this particular session, you are actually, consenting to be part of this recording of the event and further sharing. So if you don't want your participation to be shared, then I think we cannot help. So please let us know. Then we can make that kind of necessary caution there. So please also ensure that your names are appearing clearly in the list that is coming up, so that we can also direct the questions if at all you are asking any questions to the speakers, referring to your name. Otherwise, it would be a little bit challenging for us to direct your questions. So we are using MS Team function for this particular session. So all the chat functions are kind of disabled for participants. So please use the Q&A function to type your questions or comments. And just one comment, just put only one question. If you have multiple questions, please split them and put it as, different questions. Don't put, question 1, 2, 3, 4 in just one comment, so that, we can close each question or comment one by one. Otherwise, it will be a little challenging for us to, close all the comments coming. We will try our best to respond, to all the questions, hopefully. If we are failing to respond because of the time constraints, we will try to, send you, or, we will put them as, Q&A things as part of the session later on. You can also reach out to us alternatively through the MICS.unicef.org email ID, or you can also write to the presenters directly if you want further clarifications or details on this, specific session or the presentation. Again, this event is open and we will be posting them online. So please be careful in terms of, how you word your comments and put your questions, etc. And unfortunately, we are not opening up this for asking questions directly. And though there is a hand up function there, we won't be opening up for asking questions directly. So if you have any questions, don't wait. Just type it in the Q&A part of this particular screen you can see on the top. So this is just a kind of housekeeping things. So with this, I'm going to introduce our first presenter, Zeyi Li, and from the University of Hong Kong. And Zeyi Li will be presenting the paper titled Examining the Dimensionality of Early Childhood Development Index 2030 across countries, findings from the multiple indicator cluster surveys round 6. So now the floor is open to you, Zeyi Li, and you can start presenting your paper. Thank you. So once again, I will be coming up on the screen. You will be having 15 minutes to present, so please keep the time. So I will come up on the screen just a minute before the time ends. Yeah, over to you, Zeyi. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so I will start to sharing my screen. Okay. So hi everyone, my name is Zeyi Li. I'm a PhD candidate from the University of Hong Kong. Thank you for offering me this opportunity to present in the International Conference on Children and Their Family using the MICS survey. On behalf of my co-authors, I'm happy to present some preliminary findings from our study on examining the dimensionality of the ECDI 2030 across countries, findings from MICS round 6. Here is the content of today's presentation. So first, I will talk about a little bit about the background of the current study. So the importance of early childhood development, ECD, has been acknowledged by the global community. ECD interventions and programs have been found to benefit individuals' physical, cognitive, and social-emotional development and lay foundations for future educational attainment, career success, and lifelong well-being. However, there are still 43% of under 5-year children in low and middle income countries facing the risk of not reaching their developmental potential. So in 2015, the UN has proposed the Sustainable Development Goals. There are many SDG goals related to ECD. Particularly, today's presentation will focus on SDG Target 4.2. So this target states that by 2030, ensure that all girls and boys have access to quality early childhood development, care, and education so that they are ready for primary education. There are 2 indicators are used to monitor countries' progress towards SDG Target 4.2. SDG 4.2.1 measures the proportion of children aged 24 to 59 months who are developmentally on track in health, learning, and psychosocial well-being by sex, while another indicator measures the participation rate in organized learning of young children by sex. And our study has particularly focused on how to measure SDG target indicator 4.2.1, which is children's developmental status. So I would like to give a little introduction of the ECDI 2030. So the ECDI 2030, so the full name of the ECDI 2030 is the Early Childhood Development Index 2030. It is a composite index of ECD, and it has been included in the Early Childhood Development module of the questionnaire for children under 5 in UNICEF's Multiple Indicator Cluster Service. The ECDI 2030 actually is an updated version based on the original ECDI. So UNICEF has developed the ECDI 2030 to measure SDG target indicator 4.2.1. It is a population-based tool, so it is designed to capture the level of children aged 24 to 59 months against developmental milestones. Basically, it is a caregiver survey, so it is a very brief tool, only consisting of 20 items. And it particularly focusing on children's 3 domains of development, namely health, learning, and psychosocial well-being. And the ECDI 2030 has some cutoff scores to determine whether a child is developmentally on track or not. So to be developmentally on track, children are expected to achieve at least 7, 9, 11, 13, and 15 milestones at ages 24 to 29 months, 30 to 35 months, 36 to 41 months, 42 to 47 months, and 48 to 59 months, respectively. So why do we want to examine the data that collected through ECDI 2030? First is there is a data desert in measuring children's developmental status, especially for children under 3 years. So the findings from the ECDI 2030 will enhance our understanding of the developmental status of children across different populations. Moreover, while the ECDI 2030 is designed to establish cutoff scores for assessing children's developmental status, it is crucial to investigate whether it effectively measures the 3 developmental domains across various countries. As we've all known, there are different growth patterns across children's competencies. And there are also social cultural influences on children's domain development, which vary across populations or countries. Since it is a caregiver survey, caregivers may have different beliefs or perceptions of children's domain development, and this is also varying across social cultural contexts. If we examine the dimensionality of the ECDI 2030, it will be helpful for policymakers, researchers, and practitioners to gain a more nuanced understanding of children's domain development across populations and to inform targeted programs or interventions. While previous research has examined the psychometric properties of the ECDI 2030, limited evidence is available regarding the dimensionality of ECDI 2030. So these are the 2 important motivations for us to conduct the current study. We aim to investigate the developmentally on-track status of young children and to explore the dimensionality of the ECDI 2030 using data from the latest round of mixed surveys conducted across different countries. We have 3 research questions. The first one is, what is children's developmentally on-track status across countries? And we would like to know, is a 3-factor structure which measures the health, learning, and psychosocial well-being domains of children, fitting the data better than a 1-factor model. And lastly, we would like to explore, is the factor structure of ECDI 2030 consistently viable across countries? The data were leveraged from the latest round of mixed survey from 9 countries. Cases with missing data on all items were excluded. and all items of ECDI 2030 were scored using a binary response scale. The donor responses were treated as missing. We first conducted descriptive analysis to summarize the age, gender, mean score, and developmentally on-track status of young children across countries. Then we conducted confirmatory factor analysis to compare a one-factor model versus a three-factor model. And we also conducted separate CFA models to see whether these models fitted differently or similarly across different countries. So first, I will present some descriptives of the sample. Sorry. Excuse me, I had to go back to, okay, this page. So as you can see here, the total sample for the current study is 46,660 children. So the sample size actually varies across countries. The percentage of boys and girls are quite balanced. There are 49% of the children are girls. And the age range for the current sample was between 24 and 59 months. As for the ECDI 2030 scores, the average score was 0.59. So you can also see there's a large variation in terms of children's ECDI 2030 scores. Children, for example, children from Afghanistan, the scores was 0.54, whereas for children from Jamaica, the scores is relatively higher, which was 0.81. And when we look at the developmentally on-track status of children across countries, we can also see the variations across countries. So for children from Jamaica, Trinidad, Uzbekistan, and Fiji, the children are more likely to be developmentally on track. When you look at countries including Afghanistan, Nigeria, you will see there are more children are more likely to be not developmentally on track. And when we look at the children's developmentally on track status across child age groups, we can also see that for children who are older, they're less likely to be developmentally on track compared to their counterparts in younger age groups. And next, when we conducted the CFA models, we can see that both one-factor model and three-factor model had satisfactory model fit indices. However, the three-factor model has significantly improved the model fit over the one-factor model. So these two-factor models actually are significantly different, and the three-factor model has fitted the data better than the one-factor model. And then we ran the CFA analysis for different countries to examine whether the the model fit is similar across countries. And we can see that most of the countries has the satisfactory model fit indices, while Afghanistan, it seems like the model fit is it's not as good as other countries. In terms of item factor loadings, we also see some similarities and differences across countries. For example, in health domain, for ECD1, the item asks the caregiver, can the child walk on an uneven surface, for example, a bumpy or steep road without falling? We can see that most of the factor loadings for most of the countries are not that high, except for Thailand. So these countries, actually, the item factor loadings of this item for most of the countries are generally high. So they had high correlations they had similar correlations with the latent variable of health development. However, if we look at ECD2, so this item asked the caregivers, can the child jump up with both feet leaving the ground? You can see there is a larger variations in terms of item factor loadings. So for countries including Fiji and Vietnam, the item factor loadings are relatively lower than countries such as Nigeria and Jamaica. And there are also similarities and differences in item factor loadings across countries in learning domain. For example, for item 7, so it asked the caregivers, can the child speak using sentences of 5 or more words that go together? For example, the house is very big. Almost all country has the similar level of item factor loading in this item. So it's not, it's small to medium level of item factor loading. While for ECD-10, so this question asked the caregiver, can the child recognize at least 5 letters of the alphabet? There is a larger variation. So for countries such as Nigeria and Uzbekistan, there is a large difference in terms of the factor loadings between these two countries. Here are another examples. So for item 15, so it is a item taps children's ability to do activities such as coloring or playing with building blocks without repeatedly asking for help or giving up too quickly. So this item actually, the factor loading is not high across all countries. And while for ECD-11 and ECD-14, there is a differences in terms of item factor loadings across countries. It is very interesting to look at the item factor loadings for measuring children's psychosocial well-being domain. Actually, we found some negative item factor loadings for ECD-19 and ECD-20 for some countries. And previous studies also suggested that these two items may not capture children's normal development in psychosocial well-being domains. While for ECD-18, we see some variations in terms of item factor loadings when this item is designed to measure children's psychosocial well-being. So in some countries, this item may capture the children's psychosocial well-being better than other countries. So from the current study's findings, we can see that the ECDI 2030 has captured the multifaceted nature of child development, and the data could be used at the domain level. And we can also see there are commonalities in the domain structures measured by the ECDI 2030 across different countries. Within each domain, there are generally similar patterns in terms of item factor loadings observed across countries. And in our further analysis, we will aim to explore the multi-group invariance of the ECDI 2030. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening. If you have some thoughts or ideas to share or any questions you may have, you're welcome to contact us by emails or just post your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Zeyi Li, for this excellent presentation. I'm sure there are some questions, so we'll come back to those questions at the end of the session. So now I will request our second presenter, Alvaro Fortin, and he is actually from UNICEF Ukraine. And Alvaro will be presenting a paper titled Using Mixed Data Extracted from IPUMS-MICS to Assess Multi-Country Effects in Children's Learning. So it's also going to be an interesting presentation. So over to you, Alvaro.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, very well. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so this presentation, the focus of this presentation is on the use of the IPUMS-MICS for this particular type of analysis, which is more modeling than descriptive, and is to check whether there are challenges in using IPUMS-MICS to go straight into modeling the data. The IPUMS is a platform that allows us to pull data from the mix already processed so that it can be compared across countries. So you select the countries that you want to use in your comparisons and the variables that are common to those countries in the mix, and it produces a report. You can ask for it in CVS or spreadsheet or Stata to conduct your analysis. I used in this case Stata data. Sorry for some reason. Okay. Stata to conduct my analysis. So I wanted to check for three things. Can we use mixed extractions from the IPUMS to enhance comparability analysis across groups? Does mixed data provide indicators that can be comparable straight from the box, let's say, and RFX detected from mix once you've extracted them from IPUMS-MICS measures consistent across groups? Or is there something that we need to do to make them comparable? What's the type of analysis I decided to use was a mimic model. But to understand the mimic model, I'll just present basic concepts of their two associated analysis, or the most commonly used analysis. One that I was interested in was measurement of invariance and confirmatory analysis using structural equation modeling, which is also a variant of the mimic. So this type of analysis permits us to take latent variables, which are observable, which are measurable through observable means, not directly related to the variable, but are external indicators, and allows us to examine whether respondents from different groups interpret that way the items in the same way, or reflect a common construct underlying the measurement. You usually check for configural metric and scalar invariance. The structural equation modeling, basically in general, is a second generation type of multivariate analysis technique. And what you want to do is to simultaneously model your hypothesis or your structure that you hypothesized and estimate complex relationships. It typically includes an unobservable concept. Otherwise, the model is saturated and then it's statistically not very meaningful. And it accounts for measurement error in observed variables. One characteristic of this type of modeling is that you should only create your model once you want to test it. And once you test it, if it's not significant, you shouldn't rerun it. Part of the robustness of this model is precisely that you hypothesized and tested, rather than check for different types of relationships before testing the model. In this case, I did do some cheating because I checked for simple correlations before hypothesizing a model, because I wasn't sure how many of the variables would be common across countries. Then the multiple indicators and multiple causes model, the mimic model, is a special case of structural equation modeling, where you test the impact of covariates on a single factor and lets itself for cross-group comparisons and measurement invariance. In my model, then, what I wanted to check was on the achievement as measured for indicator 4.2.1 of the SDGs, which is where their children are on track for learning math and reading. I extracted then the indicators I found on a random sampling of countries. I chose countries not for any particular reason, but basically I chose them randomly because my interest was on checking whether I could use this type of technique, drawing from different types of combinations of countries. So I found two items that related across the countries on achievement for reading, and they were reading comprehension and letter recognition. They were coded dichotomously in the IPUMS extraction. On 1, 0 for correct, incorrect, and then indication of whether there was no answer for that particular item in a particular case, or whether it had not been included in the sample for that particular assessment. And then the same case for math, where there were 3 items: identification of bigger number, addition, and number sequence. This is my measurement model, and the one that can be subjected to invariance analysis. The other part of my mimic model, which would be the causes leading to good or bad achievement, I found 2 variables that were of interest and that had enough cases. One was the wealth index, and the other one, the education level of the mother. We know that the education level of the mother is at least partially related to the wealth index. This is why we also established, I established a covariance here. And once I ran this for the whole group of countries, this is the model as it shows up. Is a significant model with all of the relationships significant, except the covariance between wealth and education level of the mother, which is worth exploring later. And then all of the relationships for the measurement model were high, whereas the causal components were not. So this is the basic statistics of the model, and I want to note that there's some significant differences in the number of cases across the countries I chose randomly. So there were 2 islands, several countries in Africa, and 1 in Europe. One thing I must highlight is that at first the model was tested without weighting, but with the missing data option, because there were cases missing for each of the samples. And the reason I did not use the weights was, first, not all software currently allows for the use of weighting indicators on the modeling, on the structural equation modeling, and Stata apparently does not yet have this functionality. It has been debated that you don't need to weight cases if you are checking for only the structure of the relationships. However, recent research indicates that yes, it's better if you weight. So this is one issue that we need to check, because while IPUMS does produce the weights for the samples, these are the weights that are estimated. It seems that they are the weights that were estimated for the single country estimation. So if you combine different countries, and interaction of groups you're interested in is inherent to the whole universe of countries that you are considering, you might need to reweight those cases as per the new sample you have conformed. Once we checked for the statistics of the whole sample, for the whole country, for the whole group of countries, we see that we have a reasonable Ramsea estimation and good fit with the CFI and TLI, which are the main indicators or the most popularly used indicators for structural equation modeling. So it seems to be a model that fits well. But then we tried the country comparison. So we divided the sample into group and area, into country and area. That means that one, for example, Kiribati had 2 groups, urban and rural, and so the other countries. When we do that, you can see that the relationships change. And we find a very strange relationship here in education level of the mother, where the correlation is even, the regression is even negative. When we look at the results per country, we do find that the coefficients of determination are not very high, and that the significance is removed from many of the relationships. But we find that the education level of mother is particularly non-significant in Kiribati and Sao Tome and Prince, which are Sao Tome and Principe, which are the two islands in the sample. So there might be something related to the urban-rural division in those particular contexts of islands. So can we use mixed extractions from the IPUMS to enhance comparative analysis? Yes. However, we do need to consider which variables we are using or in our extraction to make those comparisons, particularly in the results of the assessments. It'd be good if we could find a way to re-estimate IRT scores, because right now we only have dichotomous results, and it'd be good to understand whether a common IRT measure across these countries would provide a more accurate assessment of the correlations. Then we probably want to have post-hoc sampling estimations for missing cases, and that might include reweighting cases as per missing per each subgroup. And this would probably be particularly useful in evaluator assess there's an error there in non-evaluator assessed variables, which means that when the surveyors come to your house, they are usually trained, they know exactly what to ask, and they will have a more homogeneous way of providing answers. Whereas if you are asking the respondent to provide an assessment, you might have much more variability and you might want to control for that. Does the mixed data provide comparable indicators when extracted from IPUMS? Yes, I think so. However, moving forward, it'd be interesting, again, to estimate differential item functioning in multi-group measurements as constructed in the new extraction that you've done. Because there might be shifts in the understanding, and it'd be interesting to analyze those before you run the model. And these should apply also probably to background questionnaires, especially when these are questionnaires, when these are answers from the participants, not from the surveyors. And are effects detected from mixed measures consistent across groups? Some differences in rural areas. However, we need to verify using weighting, both weighting as per the new sample probably, and reweighting for missing cases. And yeah, so moving forward, we probably want to extend psychometric analysis to background variables and probably, if possible, add either an option in the IPUMS extraction, which is not very likely because the IPUMS emphasizes the creation of these reports that merge different data sets, but we could certainly propose guidelines of how to conduct that once you have a multi-country extraction. Second, and related to that, it's including a procedure for IRT scores once you've merged different data sets, especially if there's loss of items in one group, because then that IRT score from the original sampling might not apply to the new resampled group. And then all of these analysis from these presentation I made probably need to be rerun using weights. And current literature suggests you can do this very well either in M+ or R-Lavan. R-Lavan has the advantage that it's open source, and so Lavan is a package of R, but both are open source. And you can, in Lavan, you can do the three things. You can run rerun weightings for missing data, rerun weightings as per the new sample, and run the structural equation modeling. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alvaro. Yeah, I think there is a lot of things to learn from this presentation in terms of using various techniques to adjust some of the data to get better estimates, I think. But again, some of the methods you mentioned, I couldn't understand. I'm not a great statistician. So I'm sure participants will have questions. So please, again, write your questions or comments in the chat. So we'll take it up at the end. So now I will be going to the last and third presenter for this session today. That is Hyejun and from Korea University, Republic of Korea. And she will be presenting the paper titled Child's Functional Difficulties and Early Childhood Development in 11 Sub-Saharan African Countries. Moderating Effect of Parental Stimulation. So that is the title of the paper. It looks very interesting. So over to you, Chi, and you can proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Okay. So good evening from South Korea. This is Hyejun from Korea University, and it is now like almost 6 p.m. here in Korea. And before we begin, I would like to let you know that the title of the study has been slightly changed due to the expansion of the data. So now we are covering not only sub-Saharan African countries, but also other low and middle income countries in the study. So I'm really excited to get a chance to present here today my work, which is titled Child's Functional Difficulties in Early Childhood Development. As I mentioned earlier, this study was done using data from 22 LMICs with additional focus on the monitoring role of learning-related factors. Then let me begin with the background of our study. It is well known that early childhood development, or ECD, is critical not only for children's healthy growth in childhood, but also for their well-being throughout life. However, still one out of 4 children living in LMICs were reported to remain developmentally off track. In terms of improving ECD, there are 5 essential components suggested in the Nurturing Care Framework, which is presented here as a figure on the right side. The associations between ECD and these 5 components have long been explored in the context of LMICs. For example, when it comes to health, good physical conditions without childhood diseases, better use of healthcare, and access to safe water have been reported to be associated with better development in early childhood. What remains underexplored in this topic is the effect of child's disabilities over ECD. According to the evidence from high-income countries, disabilities can compromise the developmental potential of children and result in delays in cognitive, language, and social development. Although a variety of disabilities may pose distinctive challenges about development, their negative effects over ECD often arise when children are prevented from exploring the physical and social environment surrounding them. Typically combined with social stigma, marginalization, and also overprotection by parents, children with disabilities experience additional difficulties when engaging in learning and playing activities. They also lack social integration, which results in more serious developmental delays. The absence of specialized services can strengthen those effects as the social system fails to incorporate these children into societies. One example is the lack of disability-friendly education programs. This can lead to frequent school dropout of children with disabilities and deprive them of formal education. Because the types and severity of disabilities vary, the extent to which ECD is influenced may differ as well. For example, children with hearing impairment can face developmental challenges that are different from those experienced by children who lack fine motor skills. Likewise, the severity of disabilities can alter how greatly the disability affects children's development. Nonetheless, we expected that these negative effects of disabilities may be buffered through potential moderators that can help children be involved in learning, playing, and socializing activities. For example, parent stimulation may reduce or even compensate the effects of disabilities. This is because stimulation can offer playful and socially interactive experiences that children with disabilities can be short of. Presence of learning and playing materials such as books and toys and attendance to preschools may also moderate the association between disabilities and development because they can provide educational opportunities. However, to the best of our knowledge, only few studies have examined how child's disabilities can affect their ECD in the context of LMICs. One of the reasons why there are only a limited number of studies would be the lack of disability-related data. To address this gap in literature, the model on child functioning and disability has been introduced to the MICS since 2017. For children aged 2 to 4 years, the model assesses 8 functional difficulties. Using this data collected from Bangladesh, Nepal, and Pakistan, Khanam et al. Reported that children with disabilities were more likely to be developmentally off track compared to their counterparts. Despite this attempt, the relevant literature remains scarce. For example, how the associations between child's disabilities and development can differ by the types and severity of disabilities are still underexplored. Also, what can moderate these associations should be further examined. Hence, the current study aimed to assess the association between child's disabilities, defined as having functional difficulties, and ECD in 22 LMICs. When estimating the association, we further considered the types and severity of difficulties. We also aimed to evaluate whether the associations was moderated by learning-related factors including maternal stimulation, presence of books and toys, and attendance to early childhood education programs. To address these study aims, we used mixed data collected from 22 LMICs between 2017 and 2020. Because the original questionnaire for ECD was developed for children aged 3 to 4 years, we restricted our sample to children in this age range. After excluding those missing information about key variables, the final analytic sample consisted of 113,000 children. ECD was measured using as a score using the Early Childhood Development Index. As introduced earlier by the first presenter, this index measures child's development status across physical, literacy numeracy, socio-emotional, and cognitive domains based on a caregiver's report. Out of the 10 items, we used 3 socio-emotional and 2 cognitive development items to construct the ECD score, which hence ranged from 0 to 5. A higher score indicated more optimal developmental status of children. It was then standardized to have a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1, which is hereafter called ECDZ score. We did not include physical and literacy numeracy development items, given that prior literature suggested these items to be less appropriate for children in this specific age range. Child's functional difficulties were measured for 8 domains, including seeing, hearing, walking, fine motor skills, communicating, learning, playing, and controlling behavior. For each domain, if the child was reported to have a lot of difficulty or incapable, then they were considered as having a functional difficulty in the corresponding domain. The child was further considered as having any functional difficulties if they had a difficulty in at least one of the 8 functional domains. Additionally, 8 functional domains were categorized as sensory, physical, and cognitive functions based on their shared characteristics. The severity in functional difficulty was also defined for these 3 categories as moderate if the child had a lot of difficulty, and severe if they were completely incapable. When assessing the association between child's functional difficulties and ECDZ score, we used 3-level random effects linear regressions to address the hierarchical structure of the dataset. So children at level 1 were nested into cluster and countries. For the presence of any sensory, physical, and cognitive functional difficulties. Separately, Model 1 regression was conducted, including socio-demographic covariates. For the 3 different categories of difficulties, the presence of functional difficulties in other functions were simultaneously adjusted for in Model 2. For example, when estimating the association between ECDZ score and difficulty in sensory functions, the presence of physical and cognitive functions difficulties were simultaneously adjusted for. For the severity of any sensory and physical and cognitive functional difficulties, regressions were done with the same set of covariates in Model 1. This was to assess whether children have lower ECDZ score according to the severity of their functional difficulties. Finally, we did an interaction analysis using Model 4. Here we assessed whether the 4 moderating variables, which include maternal stimulation, presence of books, presence of toys, and attendance to early childhood education programs, can change the main association. Therefore, we estimated the statistical interaction between the moderators and the presence of any and categorized functional difficulties. Now, let me introduce our results. First, about 6% of children were reported to have any functional difficulties, and this ranged from around 1% in Nepal to more than 12% in Central African Republic. The prevalence of functional difficulties varied across the categories. For example, around 1% of children had difficulty in sensory and physical functions, respectively, while approximately 5% of children had difficulty in cognitive functions. Only few children were found to have severe difficulty in each category. When all covariates were adjusted for, children with any functional difficulties showed significantly lower ECDZ score compared to those without functional difficulties. The magnitude of associations varied by the categories of functional difficulties. Having difficulty in physical functions, for example, was associated with the lowest ECDZ score, followed by cognitive and sensory functions in Model 1. After the presence of difficulties in 3 categories were simultaneously adjusted for in Model 2, the magnitudes overall attenuated. However, we still found the associations to be statistically significant. The figures here illustrate the association between ECD and functional difficulties separated into moderate and severe difficulties. We found that moderate and severe difficulties were all associated with ECDZ score when compared to those without functional difficulties. The magnitude was greater for severe than moderate difficulties, and this was particularly true for physical and cognitive functions. Lastly, from the interaction analysis, we found that there was little statistical interaction between child's functional difficulties and learning-related factors. The plots presented on the right show the predicted ECDZ score by the presence of any functional difficulties and learning-related factors. Solid lines are for children without functional difficulties, and dotted lines represent those with any functional difficulties. If we take a look at Figure 1, which estimated the interaction by maternal stimulation, you may see that the 2 lines went almost parallel from left to right. This shows us that there was no significant moderation by maternal stimulation in the association between any functional difficulties and ECD. Same patterns were observed for the other learning-related factors and also for sensory, physical, and cognitive functional difficulties. Now I would like to move on to the discussion section. First of all, we found that children with functional difficulties had less optimal ECD. There may be several pathways through which children with functional difficulties experience challenges in terms of development. One mechanism is that functional difficulties such as visual impairment or incapability of gross motor skills, such as walking, may prevent children from exploring and interacting with the physical and social environments. They may be also limited in terms of opportunities to engage in learning and playing activities such as reading books, drawing and writing, or rough and tumble plays. This will result in the lack of social integration, which in turn contributes to delays in cognitive and social development. Also due to social stigma, discrimination, and marginalization, children with functional difficulties are likely to experience low-quality care. According to the disability report from the UNICEF 2021, these children are receiving less stimulation, less responsive care, and less supervision from their caregivers. Although we adjusted for maternal stimulation in the current work, the quality of stimulation may have been different between children with and without functional difficulties. Another explanation for the main association found here would be that children with functional difficulties are not experiencing as much benefit as their peers do, even when they can access learning opportunities. Although various interventions have been implemented to improve ECD in LMICs, it is still hard to say that every program was disability inclusive. Education in particular should try to incorporate children with disabilities by providing physically accessible school environments, including classrooms, toilets and water taps, playing spaces, and transportation. Learning materials should also be carefully tailored to the special needs of children, and school systems, including teachers, should be informed well enough to fully understand, identify, and respond to these needs. In terms of the main results, we also found that children with severe difficulties, which mean that they were completely incapable of certain functions, showed less optimal ECD. Complete incapability in sensory, physical, and cognitive functions may require more extensive, different types of services compared to moderate or no difficulties across their life cycle. Although the prevalence of severe difficulties was found substantially low, as around 0.5%, policy interventions should be developed to assist their overall development. Lastly, we did not find moderation effects to be statistically significant. I would say that learning-related factors included in our work, like maternal stimulation, may be important for every child regardless of their disabilities. However, one of the reasons for no moderation effects found may be because these factors were not tailored enough to disability-related needs. The factors may hence be limited in their ability to fully intervene with the development of children. It would be thus important for future studies to explore what moderators and interventions will be able to effectively improve ECD of children with disabilities. I would like to note some important methodological limitations here. First, the data for children's functional difficulties in ECD were all self-reported by caregivers, and thus we believe that these measures have a possibility of measurement error. Moreover, some variables used to construct ECD score are intrinsically similar to the variables representing difficulties in cognitive functions. For example, as a part of ECD score, socio-emotional development items ask whether a child gets along well with other children, kicks, bites, or hits others, and gets distracted easily and quickly. These items are closely related to difficulties in playing, learning, and controlling behavior, and thereby we're trying not to overinterpret their statistical associations. Although we included a comprehensive set of grades, there may be still residual confounding due to unobserved variables such as neighborhood environment, preterm birth, or malnutrition. So to wrap up, I would like to summarize our work as the following. That is, children with disabilities are facing developmental challenges in low and middle income countries. To secure their developmental potential, public health and education policies should be precisely designed to fully identify and respond to their needs in the domains of families, schools, communities, and health systems. Any questions are appreciated both during the session and via email written in the slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Hyejun, for this nice presentation. Yeah, I think it's very good analysis. So I'm sure there will be questions on the way. So now we will take up the questions. So Turgay, you want to read out the questions to start with, and then please type in your questions if you have any questions or comments. Please do so. We have a few questions. Please proceed.
All right, I'm looking at the questions. We don't have too many. Can mute yourself. Sorry. We are in the same room, so we are having echo, and the two microphones are on. So I'll start with the first presenter. We received two questions from Otoba Uya to Zeyi Li. The first one is asking or going like this. Thank you, Zeyi Li, for the presentation. Were your analysis weighted? If not, was there a specific reason for this? And I will read the other one as well to the presenter on ECDI 2030. Why do you think children were less likely to be developmentally off track with increasing age? And the last question comment was from me, actually, pointing out to the to a design questionnaire design mistake in one of the surveys analyzed, Afghanistan specifically. The question or the set of questions for ECDI 2030 were not asked about children age 2. So have you considered that? I asked, and she kindly responded to you, saying that they will check further and see if it will have any effect on their analysis. But please, Zeyi Li, you may respond to these.
So for the first question, so first, thank you for all your questions and suggestions. Actually, this is preliminary findings from the current study, so we haven't actually looked into this sampling ways or survey ways in our analysis, and I think it is a good point to increase the generalizability of our findings, or to sample, like to have a more representative sampling strategies. So for the second question, in terms of why do I think children were less likely to be developmentally off track with increasing age? I think it is a very good point, because from the descriptives we can see that as children's age increased, the proportions of children who are developmentally on track seems to be decreased. So I think it would be very worthwhile to explore whether the ECDI 2030 has measured a different age of children similarly. So whether it is we can analyze the measurement invariance across different age groups. So I think this is some implication for the analysis that we may conduct. And also, thank you for raising this design issue in terms of in Afghanistan, the ECDI 2030 were not asked about children aged 2. So I think it is related to the CFA findings for Afghanistan. If we looked at the CFA model fit indices across countries, we can see that Afghanistan seems to be is less satisfactory for Afghanistan. So I think it's probably related to this design issue because it haven't asked the development of children aged 2. So if we can explore whether the factor structure actually works similarly across different age groups, then probably we can extend our findings to aged 2 across different countries. But I'm not sure this will definitely affect the CFA findings for Afghanistan. So thank you for raising this issue. I think we will need to delve into this issue, in our further analysis. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any questions raised for Alvaro Fortin, but we have a question for Hyejun Ji from Yeji. Thank you, Chi, for the presentation. I was wondering whether there were any differences between countries or regions.
Thank you, Yaji, for this valuable
You
comment.
are muted.
Am I muted? Can you hear me now? Okay, thank you, Yaji, for this comment. So basically, we do not have country-level estimates for this association, but we did an analysis stratifying the countries by their income level. So our sample of 22 countries were classified into 7 low-income countries and 15 lower middle-income countries. And from this stratification analysis, we found that there was a greater estimate or lower ECDZ score estimates for low-income countries. In other words, children with disabilities were associated with lower ECDZ score where, if they're living in low-income countries compared to those living in lower middle-income countries. I believe that this may be partially attributed to the lack of relevant infrastructures and specialized services that can be provided to children with disabilities in low-income countries. But still, we have to figure out what are contributing to the associations greatly in low-income countries. And in that context, I think country-specific and region-specific analysis would help as well. Thank you for the comment.
Thank you very much for that feedback. So please, again, if there are additional questions, comments, please type in. So I think as there are no more questions, so I just want to also have some questions. So one is, first of all, to Zeyi Li. I think that was an excellent presentation. So the analysis and work you have done, I hope that is going to help in terms of further improving the ECDI tool itself. So that way, I think the work you have done is excellent. And of course, there are some areas that needs to be looked at further. One observation I have is, I think in the previous question also, there was one element that was left out. I think that was not answered probably on using weights, especially when you are aggregating, multiple countries, and then the weights in the data sets are not going to help. So you have to do something to merge them. So that is one, I think that was not answered. And second is one observation I have is, the ECDI score you are getting is slightly different from what is there in the reports. So I am not sure whether you have cross-checked the values. Is there any difference in the way you are calculating the ECDI 2030 vis-a-vis what is being published? Because I have noticed some minor differences, and some cases it is like, huge. When it comes to, for example, Vietnam, the value you have shown in your presentation is much lower. Likewise, for Fiji, I checked only few of them. I think they are differing too much from the published report. So whenever we are doing this kind of analysis, first thing probably we should be doing is whether the values are matching with the report, published report or not. And all of them should match. And then we proceed with the further analysis. Maybe there is one or two indicators you didn't code them properly, so please check and make sure that these values, sometimes maybe even our report can be wrong, but in that case also good to know, right? So which one is correct? So yeah, please check that and make sure the values are matching with the published ones. That is for Zeyi Li. And for Hyejun, I think again it's an excellent analysis. So my observation or comment is, the ECDI tool, ECDI 2030, that is not necessarily designed to measure the ECDI 2030 for the kind of disabled population or something specific target group. So it is for a general kind of population. So again, going down and looking at it, specifically for disabled population, may have some challenges and limitations. So, but at the same time, the analysis you have done is very good. My question is, are you kind of coming up with some kind of suggestions or recommendations that, okay, if the child is of a specific type of disability, then some of the items in the ECDI current tool have it to be kind of, dealt with differently, so that, this ECDI index is comparable, because you cannot expect a disabled child with something to, pick something or do something the same way, right? But that doesn't mean that they are developmentally off track. So yeah, so I think, are you looking at that angle? That is kind of a question from my end. I think, yeah, so these are some of the observations I have on these presentations. Yeah, so you can respond, Zeyi Li or Hyejun if you want to add on to those comments.
Thank you, Jay, for your comments. It's very helpful. I will double check the reports and the findings that we've got from the ECDI 2030, especially for the average scores. So for now, I'm thinking maybe it's probably related to different scoring or codings or the cases that were selected while dealing with the missingness. Yeah, so I will double check with statistics. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Hyejun, you want to comment or add anything?
Yes, obviously. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Thank you so much for the comment. Actually, I did not really think very much about that the ECDI measure would not be really suitable for children with disabilities because it was first developed for general population. I think that was very valuable comment for me. And in terms of the suggestion for the ECD measurement targeted at children with disabilities, I would say that given that our current work is using the ECDI measure, which was that was not updated in 2020, which is different from ECDI 2030 that Zeyi Li has presented earlier. Because we are using the older version of the measurement, it would not be really appropriate to capture the developmental potential of children with disabilities. But as far as I know, the new measurement of ECDI 2030 is capturing more diverse dimensions of development. And one of the points that I felt really necessary was that just expanding this ECDI 2030 to many more countries, because so far only limited number of country surveys have included this new measurement into their surveys. So when it comes to measuring the association between child's functional difficulties and ECDR, I really want to see if the associations vary depending on the measurement that we use to estimate the early childhood development. So far, I'm not really sure that what detailed suggestion could be provided in terms of what specific items would be included or changed for children with disabilities. But I think it would be really helpful if we can have new data about ECDI 23 for children with disabilities and the expanded sample of the countries.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I think there are a lot of data available from countries. They have collected ECDA 2030. So you have seen from Zeyi Li's presentation, she used all those countries collected or used ECDA 2032, not the earlier version. So you have a lot of data available now to expand and work more on that. Okay, that is excellent. If there are no other comments, there is one. Okay, yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, there's a last minute question to Alvaro from Ranto. Ranto asks, do you think doing the analysis with the raw data instead of IPUMS-MICS will change anything? If not, what was the main reason for choosing IPUMS-MICS?
So the main reason for choosing the IPUMS-MICS was precisely because I wanted to see if the extractions lend themselves for modeling. Most of the reports we have from MICS are descriptive based on frequencies, but they are variables that certainly can lend themselves to be modeled into latent variables that can show relationships among them, and that could provide a wealth of information on how to program. So this was the reason I chose IPUMS-MICS. And I think using a country-by-country data, like if I took one single country and rerun the model, I think the models could potentially be different. Actually, the cross-country comparison I did of the model showed that the island states behave differently than the other states because I divided each group into rural and urban, which might suggest that islands, the rural-urban divide operates differently in islands than in other continental countries. And so if we took cross-national grouping and rerun the analysis and did the cross-country comparison, this is why I was discussing recalculating the weightings, because I think it might also change the results. If the weight assigned right now to the cases, right now the weight has been estimated as a weight of the sample of the country, but the representation of each subgroup, if we take all the countries together, will create differences in how many are rural, how many are urban. So there might be differences in the weights. If we recalculate the weights using the whole group of countries as the universe rather than the one single country. The only thing is that then we would need to have the same population data that was used when calculating the original weights, and that is not provided by IPUMS, right? We would have to find those data with the mixed teams in each country. And what was there anything else? If not, what? Yeah. So in one thing I want to conclude though is that I think IPUMS is really valuable. I found it to be an excellent tool, and if you're modeling, and my comments are just if you're modeling, if you're just describing results, I think it's fine. If you want to model, then you might want to consider these issues and using Lavan instead of something like Stata, just to make sure that you can include weights into modeling, statistically modeling. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Alvaro. So I think no more comments from the participants. So Turgay, you have anything? No. Okay, I think we have almost 10 minutes remaining, but we don't have to drag it too much. So let us conclude. So thank you very much, Zeyi Li, Alvaro, and Hyejun Chief for the excellent presentations. I think it was very informative. I hope all the participants also enjoyed the session. So thank you all participants for joining the session and contributing to the discussions. I hope some of the exchanges will help in terms of improving the papers further. And yeah, so that is going to be really helpful, I think, for the researchers and others. So finally, I think, as I mentioned in the beginning, this session is recorded, and we will be making this available in the MICS website, as well as the BPA website, and you can actually share them with your team or colleagues or your social media platforms, once that is available. And you can also kind of watch other sessions that you were not able to join because of the overlaps of some of those sessions. So I think with that, I would like to conclude this session. And once again, thank you all, and have a good day, good afternoon, good evening. Bye for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much.